How to make your 45 ACP recoil less. We have our federal gold medal match Semi-Wadcutter 185 grain versus some 38 special Wadcutters, and both of these are known for having very low recoil. So I'm really curious of what we're going to see when we're testing through subcompact pistols, because I did test these rounds through longer barrels and they did fantastic, especially that 45 ACP. So I'm thinking if we use that load in a subcompact pistol, we might have less recoil than a 9mm, but still more effectiveness. So I have tested these in the past, and I did test this 38 special through this particular revolver, but I did that in a heavy winter clothing test. So I haven't done a traditional test like I'm going to do today. So we're going to see how these things do. I'm going to use my 3.3-inch barrel Smith & Wesson M&P 45 Shield to do the test with the 45, and my Taurus 605 with a 2-inch barrel to test the 38 special. Interestingly enough, there's about the same amount of barrel travel with both of those, and this revolver weighs 20.5 ounces. This pistol weighs 21 ounces. So we should, be able to tell what kind of low recoil we get with a very fair comparison between the two. So I'm going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy I get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic gel test. So we're going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics to see what the best potential of those cartridges are. No denim in the way that could potentially clog a traditional hollow point. Not going to be a problem here, but I like to stay consistent. No rib simulation that can slow down its potential for penetration, and we'll see how they do in just plain clear ballistics. Then we'll move on to doing more of a real world simulation, where I'm going to have 4 layers of t-shirt material in this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4-inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. I like to stay within this first gel block when doing that, because in my calculations, if we go like 3 inches past the back rib simulation, it could indicate that those rounds could pass through an average size individual, but I'd like to keep them within the back rib simulation there. So we'll do a plain clear ballistic shot, then a real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, so I'm not going to run the 38 special of the chronograph, because I've already chronographed that from that exact same revolver, from that same box of ammo, and what we were getting is 637 feet per second, 133 foot-pounds energy. I have ran this through my Glock 41 with a 5.3-inch barrel, and I was getting 737 feet per second. So let's see how much we lose from that 737 feet per second by dropping to a 2-inch shorter barrel. So let's see what we get with our 45 ACP here. .698, 661, and this is the concern I was having with this ammo, that maybe it's too weak to run. Now I got a feed jam, it didn't feed in, so that could have something to do with the lower power. I'll keep going here. 630, 629, 643. So yeah, we lost a good amount of velocity, but that's not necessarily a bad thing with solid rounds, because that kind of helps it to, tear through the target a little slower and not over penetrate. So that's what I'm hoping to see with these. So let's hit our ballistics gel block with these and see how our 38 special compares to this 45 ACP. And I was going to make a mention that I thought that 45 ammo would potentially malfunction before I even started doing the chronograph. It just kind of slipped my mind. So when it happened, kind of confirms what I was thinking that could happen. So if you want to run that particular round, you really need to make sure that it's going to function in your particular pistol. So we're going to do our plain clear ballistics shot. No denim in the way that could potentially clog a hollow point. These are not hollow points, but I like to stay consistent when I do my real world simulation. So no denim in the way, no rib simulation that could potentially slow down its penetration. So just plain clear ballistics. Let's see if we can get here with our 38 special Wadcutter. Very low recoil for sure. I should have one more round in here. see how our 45 does. Let's go take a look. All right, so that's getting pretty good performance, like what I was wanting to see. And you know, our 45, I would say, did better than our 38 in a certain sense, because we didn't over penetrate and we got more damage going on in there. First 3-inch energy dump, you know, it does look like the 38 actually tore a little bit more when it first entered this than the 45, but once we get into that main block, it looks like that 45 is doing quite a bit more damage going on there. Just a bigger damage path, and we didn't over penetrate. With our 38 special wad cutter, we went right to 19.5 inches, which I wouldn't really consider over penetration, but it is, you know, I guess on a technical note, too far. Our 45 ACP, we got about 15.75 inches, so kind of perfect penetration overall with our 45. Let's see how these do in our real world simulation now. All right, our real world simulation. So I have 4 layers of t-shirt on there, which I know is kind of redundant because, you know, these are not hollow points, but I like to stay consistent from test to test. 4 layers of t-shirt followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard that represents hitting ribs or sternum. 16 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/4 inch MDF at the back to represent hitting back ribs. So if we can hit at least, you know, 12 inches in this and not pass through the back rib simulation, I consider that a pretty good success. So let's see what we can get here with our 38 special. All right. Let's hit it with our 45 ACP. I had to put some ammo in that gun, but let's hit it with our 45 ACP now. We'll take a look. All right, so one thing I did notice is that, you know, the gel block and everything shook a lot more violently when that 45 hit. So, you know, even if it might not be a lot more powerful, it does seem like it hits a lot harder. So let's take a look here at our rib simulation. And they both went in straight. So our 38 and our 45, you know, the 45 is a bigger hole, not significantly bigger, which means that this probably could have started to mushroom a little bit when it hit this, as where this is a harder bullet with our 45, just went right through. So overall, again, I'm seeing a lot more damage there with our 45. And with our 38, it looks like that rib simulation significantly changed its ability to keep penetrating consistently. Our 45 did the standard thing of, you know, penetrating just a hair less. So I'm going to say our 45 looks really good here. Our 38 special, we just barely met our minimum of, we got 12.5 inches. I know Parallax will throw that up and make it look like it's probably 13, but 12.5 inches is where our 38 special is. And our 45 ACP, I would say, has a more ideal penetration. We're 13.5 inches with our 45. So I'm seeing what I like to see with the 45, and that is consistency. You know, we're not changing a whole lot between our real world simulation and our plain gel shot, as we're with our 38, you know, things change up a lot, and I don't like to see that. And that generally happens when you don't have a whole lot of power behind around. I see that with like 22 Magnum, stuff like that too. So I would say overall, looking at this, our 45 did better. And I know a lot of people are gonna be like, well, that's common sense, I could have told you that. But it is still good to actually test these things and just kind of see what are gonna happen, because, you know, I think a lot of people might have assumed these would go through 2 blocks, but the lower powered, you know, because these are lower powered, they're not going to over penetrate. So they did pretty well. So let's play this on a block. We'll take a close up look at them. Then I'll shoot our steel and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets going through plain gel, our 38 special and our 45 ACP. Interesting here, our 38 is actually longer, and you know, being long, it's long because it's a hollow base, so that weight's got to go somewhere. There is more chance it would tumble, but this seems like to be a pretty good lead alloy where it didn't really mushroom too much from the side here, so it's hard enough that that's a fantastic wad cutter in my opinion. I've seen some really cheap ones that just are not very good, but this Federal wad cutter is pretty good. And then our 45. So here's a close-up look at these going through plain gel, so you can see the difference in bullet design. So if we line up those fronts of those wad cutter parts there, you can see there's a lot bigger hole going to happen with that 45. Very interesting. Now when we look at the ones going through our real world simulation, things change up quite a bit because our wad cutter did mushroom like I was thinking. So once it hit that rib simulation, it starts to mushroom and then put a bigger hole through there. So that makes the difference in diameter a little bit less. So compared to our one through our plain gel here, we get a good size increase going through our rib simulation there. So when we compare that to the size of the 45, you know, it's a little bit closer to it, but our 45 still consistently did better. You know, that mushrooming of that bullet really did slow it down. That's why it didn't penetrate very far. Not just because it hit that rib simulation at such a low power, but because it also mushroomed, and now it's got more drag going through there. It's not going to penetrate as far as where our 45 just stayed very consistent. So I'm going to say for our terminal ballistics, our 45 did a bit better here. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, so double the distance of typical, you know, self-defense averages when it comes to a self-defense encounter. So I just want to get a front sight picture with these, pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target and see if there's a huge difference in my ability to control these different rounds. So let's see what we get with our 38 special. All right, so let's shoot really good. 45 ACP, I put the extended grip on there, so now I got 8 rounds going on, so a little bit higher capacity. Let's see how these things will do. There we go again with that. You know, it just doesn't feed in quite as straight as what we want to see, and that is because these are about half the power of a typical 45. So these pistols are really designed to handle a lot more power and have the slide coming back at a much further distance and then slam forward. And if we're not getting that slide to go back as far as it can, then we're having problems. So it's not the design of the bullet, because they're already fed in. It's just that they half fed in and half the case is sticking out. So just not enough momentum there to get that going. So I'll keep going here. Here it goes again. So this is what I'm talking about here. Now it's a live round that tried to feed in, but it just, you know, just didn't have enough momentum there. So here's the thing. I think that if you were to, you know, have this spring reduced specifically to handle ammo like this, I think it would be a fantastic option. I should say increased or reduced, however that's going to work to make that work right. I'm not an expert, I'm not a gunsmith on that, but whatever would need to be done to make this run could be done. So if that were to be something you were going to do, you really would want to be someone where that's the only ammo you're going to run, because you can't handle the recoil of, you know, higher end cartridges. And I could see that. I could actually see that being a thing, you know, because if you're a person, you got one gun, you got a 45, you bought it when you were 45 and now you're 65 and you're like, I'm not liking gold dot anymore. It might be cheaper to, you know, take something like this and have it set to run something like this. So I would say I don't recommend this ammo for the average person, obviously. It ran fine in my Glock, which has a thinner slide, but it just didn't want to run this. So I wouldn't recommend it. But if you had, like, let's say a 625 revolver, or you had your pistol set to run this, or it just runs it in general, you know, it just happens to run it, I think it's a fantastic low recoil option. Now with our 38 Special, you know, that did 38 Special things. You know, this gold medal match or MagTech or any other wad cutter typically does almost exactly that same thing. It's really only when you get into really, really cheap stuff like PPU or something like that you see some really terrible performance with wad cutters, because the bullets are so soft that they'll like start to wobble and smush through the rib simulation. But if you stick with like a reputable wad cutter in 38, Federal, any other reputable American brand, or the MagTech or something like that, they'll do about what these did. So low recoil options. The 38 had a little bit less recoil, but for a 45 that did recoil about like a standard pressure 9mm of a subcompact pistol, but it got a bigger hole cutting through there. And that's kind of my thought process behind doing this test, because if you're talking like a 9mm, you get a short enough barrel, you get ammo that's standard pressure so you can handle it easier. At that point, sometimes you don't get expansion. I've seen it. I just recently tested some 9mm, no expansion through our real world simulation. Well, at that point, you got a 35 caliber hole. Well, with this, you got a 45 caliber hole. Don't have to worry about expansion. So enough rambling here. I think this is a very interesting test just to kind of see and confirm whether this stuff will work well. And I'm going to say the 45 did fantastic for its terminal ballistics. It's just doesn't want to run in my pistol. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like. And thanks for watching.